Have you ever taken the motorway in the dead of night, alone, with your headlights slicing through the pitch black and the nagging feeling that something or someone is watching you from the darkness? Well, many lorry drivers have been through it, and some were never quite the same again after what they saw. Tonight, you're going to hear real accounts from hauliers who swear they encountered the inexplicable in the middle of the night. Figures that cross the tarmac, voices that crackle through the radio, presences no one has ever managed to explain. These aren't internet rumors. They're lived experiences of men hardened to danger, solitude, and the hush of the open road. And the most chilling part, it could happen to any one of us. So, if you think you've seen everything the motorways have to offer, brace yourself. Because after these stories, you might think twice before driving alone after dark. Picture the weight of a lorry cab, the constant growl of a diesel engine, the smell of oil and stale coffee mingling with the damp night air. These blokes spend hours, days on end, crisscrossing the country. They know every bend, every derelict petrol station, every stretch where the mobile signal vanishes and the world seems to end. But what happens when the silence is shattered by something that shouldn't be there? When the rearview mirror shows more than the road behind? These are the ignored testimonies, the tales swapped between mates during quick stops, because no one wants to be labeled mad. Tonight, we give them a voice. Let's start with the story of a man who stopped to help and wished he never had. Before we dive into the accounts, let's understand the world of these lorry drivers. Life on the road isn't the romantic idyll you see in films. It's endless hours of isolation, with your body aching from sitting in the same position, your eyes fighting sleep, and your mind drifting to thoughts you'd rather avoid. Silence is a constant companion, broken only by the engine's drone or the hiss of the radio searching for a signal in remote patches. Many drive at night to dodge the traffic, but that's precisely when the fear creeps in. The blackness outside feels alive, and the full beams illuminate just enough to reveal what you don't want to see. These men are tough, used to burst tires, torrential downpours, and accidents at the roadside. But what happens when the threat comes from something that defies explanation? When mental exhaustion opens doors to the unknown? They don't seek attention, in fact. Most prefer to keep quiet, because who would believe them? Yet these accounts endure, passed mouth to mouth at service stations like whispered warnings. They probe the fear of what we can't see but can feel. And by listening, you don't just get suspenseful entertainment. You gain empathy for those who live it every day. Because, in the end, it could be you gripping the wheel tighter than necessary. Now, let's move to the first account. From a driver who learned the hard way that it's not always wise to stop for a stranger. It was just another night for Silver, a veteran haulier with over 2 decades on Britain's roads. He was on a stretch of the Pennines, where the motorway twists between mist-shrouded hills and the air grows heavy with the scent of wet earth. A light drizzle had been falling for hours, making the tarmac treacherous and the headlights less effective. Silver drove slowly, the windscreen wipers squeaking rhythmically while the radio hissed without finding a station. He was knackered, but focused. He had to deliver his load by dawn. Suddenly, in the heart of the gloom, a figure appeared on the hard shoulder. A man, standing there, arm raised for a lift. He wore an old waxed jacket, soaked through, and had a lost look that Silver couldn't ignore. Against his better judgment, Silver pulled over. The chap climbed in without much chatter, just a gruff cheers. The smell of rain, and something else perhaps, old tobacco or damp, soil filled the confined cab. Silver asked where he was headed, but the man only muttered something about keeping on. They drove in silence for about 10 minutes, the engine rumbling like a mechanical heartbeat. Silver glanced in the rear view to check on the stranger, and the seat was empty. Completely empty. No sign of him. The lorry was still swaying from the motion, but the passenger had vanished, as if he'd never existed. Silver pulled onto the hard shoulder, heart pounding, and got out to look. The wet ground showed no fresh footprints. Nothing. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe he'd nodded off for a second. Maybe it was a trick of tired eyes. But the seat was still damp where the man had sat. Silver carried on, hands trembling slightly, until he reached the next service station. There he ordered a strong brew and mentioned the incident to the attendant, a local who knew every legend of the area. The man gave a humorless smile and said, "You saw the man from the moor. He turns up when it rains hard. They say he died up there years ago in a crash and still hitches. A ride to finish the journey he never completed." Silver said nothing, just stared into his tea as if it held answers. Since that night, he's never stopped for hitchhikers on remote stretches, and whenever it rains, he checks the mirrors more often than needed. Because the fear of the unknown doesn't fade, lingers, like an invisible passenger, waiting for the right moment to reappear. But what makes this tale so unnerving? It's how close it feels to reality. Silver was a practical bloke, no time for ghosts or folklore. He dealt in facts, loads, deadlines, roads. But that night broke something in him. He started questioning what he saw, what he felt, and you. Ever stopped to help someone on the roadside and wondered if it was wise? These accounts remind us the motorway isn't just a route, it's a place where the veil between the known and the inexplicable thins. Now, let's hear from another driver who heard a voice that had no right to exist. Batista was the sort who believed in luck and graft, nothing else. He'd been hauling across the Midlands for 15 years, familiar with every disused quarry, every forgotten hamlet. His longtime mate Demas had perished in a horrific smash 2 years earlier. Lorry, out of control on a steep descent. Since then, Batista drove solo, radio off, to avoid memories. But on one bitterly cold night, high in the peaks, something shifted. The air was icy, the wind howling like a distant wolf, and the narrow road felt more perilous than ever. Batista eased along, headlights struggling against the dense dark. Suddenly, the radio which was unplugged crackled to life. A sharp burst of static filled the cab, followed by a clear, familiar voice. "Batista, ease off. Something's on the road ahead." It was Dimas's voice, exact as he remembered. Gravelly, urgent, with that unmistakable Brummy twang. Batista froze. He braked hard on instinct, the lorry skidding on the wet surface. And there, mere meters away, a fallen tree blocked the carriageway, a landslide he wouldn't have spotted in time. Heart racing, he looked at the radio, dead, no power, as if nothing had happened. He pulled over, climbed out shaking, and checked the dash. No loose wires, no explanation. Tears came unbidden, mingling with a terror he'd never known. Demas was gone, buried, mourned, forgotten by all but him. Yet that voice had saved his life. Batista spent the rest of the night at a nearby lay-by, chatting with other drivers. One mentioned similar tales, voices of lost mates, warning of danger. "The road keeps the souls of those who died on it," the man said. Batista didn't argue. Since then, he travels with the radio always on, muttering a quick prayer before turning the key. And every time he hears static, he wonders if it's just interference or a mate trying to help one last time. This story makes us ponder what lingers after death. Batista changed, more cautious, more spiritual. He now shares these accounts so others know they're not mad. Because the fear of the unknown isn't just fright, it's transformation. It sparks curiosity about what lies beyond the visible. Empathy for those who face it alone. What if you heard a voice from the past? The road has ways of linking us to what we've lost. Now, brace for an account involving sight and rain, where the past literally materializes in the mirror. Rogerio was hauling through the Welsh borders, a stretch notorious for treacherous bends and persistent fog. It was 3 in the morning, and the rain fell like a curtain, blurring the line between tarmac and the sheer drop beside it. He was alone, the radio playing an AM station with crackly old tunes interrupted by static. Suddenly, at mile marker 237, a woman appeared at the roadside. Drenched hair plastered to her pale face, she raised an arm for a lift. Rogerio hesitated. Who would be out there, alone, at that hour? But compassion won. He stopped, opened the door, and she climbed in without a word. The scent of rainwater and something metallic filled the cab. They drove in silence for a few minutes. Rogerio asked if she was all right, but she only nodded. staring ahead. When he glanced in the rear view to check traffic, she was gone. The seat still dripped water, but empty. Rogerio slammed on the brakes, jumped out, and searched around nothing but rain and darkness. Panic crawled up his spine like a chill, unrelated to the night. He pressed on to the next services, body trembling, and told the attendant, "The man wasn't shocked. That's the woman from the crash. Died there in '98, car rolled in the rain. Someone sees her every week, begging a lift to a destination she'll never reach." Rogerio looked it up later. The accident was real. Old photos showed the wreckage exactly at marker 237. He's never driven that stretch without a shiver. Without checking the back seat, the experience changed him. He started sharing the story, giving voice to what many dismiss. Because fear isn't just to scare, it's to remind us the road carries tragic memories. What if you saw someone who shouldn't be alive? These accounts plunge us into intense entertainment where the supernatural brushes the everyday, creating the sense it could happen to anyone. But there's more. Let's reflect on what binds these men. These lorry drivers aren't film heroes, they're real people bearing scars the road inflicts. They confront the fear of the unknown, not by choice, but because it finds them. Voicing these overlooked accounts stirs curiosity in us, empathy for their isolation. The payoff: immersive entertainment that makes us feel part of the tale, as if we're in the cab with them. Because, ultimately, what terrifies is how close this is to our world. Now, to the close, with a hook to leave you mulling. Recapping these accounts, a pattern emerges. The motorway never forgets its dead, and the living pay the price. Silva, Batista, Rogerio, all altered, carrying tension that doesn't fade. The fear of the unknown transforms, sparks empathy and curiosity. Above all, this gripping entertainment makes us feel it could happen to anyone. Next time you drive at night, remember, what you hear or see may not be illusion, and you. Ever experienced the inexplicable? Tell us in the comments, but mind. Sometimes it's wiser not to listen for what might answer back.